Well, a couple of days ago, Brian Wang and I did a video about AI, AGI, about Tesla, about X.AI, X, uh, all the different companies, and how that is going to potentially all play out over the next year or so as we approach whatever AGI is. It's a video that I would highly recommend you see if you haven't already seen it. Um, I think it really explained a lot to me, and so maybe you're already way ahead of me. But if you're only kind of with me, then I'd highly recommend you check it out. Brian was able to just really help me to understand a lot more about where we're headed. All right, but having said that, this video, Brian, thank you for coming back and
Thank
helping
you.
us once again. This video is because in order for this to happen, this is so funny because we are on the verge of changing the world. Let's say, let's think about the printing press. So the printing press, when it was starting to produce what it was producing, was changing the world because all of a sudden people were going to need to read. People were going to be able to, they're going to want to be able to read. They're going to want to be trained. They're going to want their kids trained to read. It's going to open up information in a way that hadn't happened probably in all of history. It's probably the most important breakthrough in communication in all of history. And yet, what if you can't make any, you don't have any of the materials to make the printing press, make the printing presses. You got one, but now you want more and you don't have the materials. Well, we're sitting here on what might also be, as much as ChatGPT might have been a pretty significant increase in the ability to communicate and the ability to get to information. AGI would be maybe 10 times that important. And yet we may not have enough electricity to get us to the goal. So that's what we want to talk about today, Brian. And you and I have talked about electricity a lot on our other channel, on your channel, actually, on the nextbigfuture.com channel. And I highly recommend people go back and look at those because we've talked about beaming
Superconductors, a lot of things. Yeah.
We've talked about superconductors. We've talked, so many, exciting potential things that could help us to get to that next big future. But realistically, Brian, between now and
2035, 2040.
Or even 2029, which is when several of these experts on AGI have said that would be the year, right? 2029. What was the guy's name? Your buddy?
Ray Kurzweil.
Ray Kurzweil says 2029. He's been saying 2029 since 1989 or something like that.
Yeah, right.
And now it's kind of looking like 2029 might even be late. It might happen earlier. But in order to get to that in that 5 years, pretty much it's going to be electricity as we know it, flowing through wires kind of as we know it, and having to be transformed with transformers, and having to be distributed somewhat like it is now, maybe. There's no massive breakthrough possible in the next 5 years that would alter much of that. Would that be fair?
I think you understated that. It's like,
I understand.
If you're saying like, oh, we have to make 20% more roads.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Then you would say between now and 2029.
Yeah.
Right. You're not gonna do anything different. The roads are gonna be the same. You're not gonna figure out something else like, oh, I figured out a way to make roads out of copper. It's
right.
Like, okay, I made one that's a mile long, right?
Right.
You're not making 1,000,000 miles of road different, right? And the power grid, 1,000,000 miles of copper, or 10 million miles of copper, right? It's not changing at all.
Right.
So, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got the pieces right now are probably the pieces. And I would say that the likelihood of us being able to even get nuclear power of any consequence by 2029 is zero, or very near zero. There's a couple of companies that might start doing these mini nukes, that maybe they'd make a few of them by 2029 if everything goes well, but they're not going to be making hundreds of mini nukes by 2029.
Maybe they make one.
They
So
make one.
yeah, so and that's probably, again, I follow all of them,
Yes, yes.
and the chance of them getting to one is small.
Okay.
So basically, you have about like 40 reactors that are in the process of being built. It's like it takes 5 years to do. It's like I'm making the Freedom Tower.
Yeah.
It took 10 years to make it.
Yeah.
Same kind of deal. I'm making a massive thing. It's going to take 5 years to do it. Whatever I'm going to complete by 2029, I already started making it. If I hadn't started making it, unless I start next year or this year in China or South Korea, I'm not going to get it done. So,
and unless there's an emergency where people are freezing to death in Amsterdam, Europe, the United States, and Australia, South Korea, Japan, none of them are going to add any coal power.
right.
I mean, it's just politically impossible. Not going to happen. Okay.
Right.
So, and then hydroelectric, if there was something that could be dammed, so to speak, it's already been dammed. But if there was some available additional damming that could be done, I like this line. Again, time and politics would both be against it. There's no way that you could build any significant dam power in the next 5 years. And
the only country, the only country doing it is China. China, is making the equivalent of a Three Gorges dam every 2 years.
Yeah,
they're already on the path to we dam every river. And
right.
It's like you had to have your plan 10 years ago,
yeah,
and then you have to get like 1 million tons of cement. And it's like, again,
yeah,
whatever you're already doing, that's what's going to happen. Nothing else,
All right, oil and gas. We're maxing out. Yes, we could get more oil and gas, but it's not going to be significant. It's going to be on the order of 20% more, 30% more, but you're not going to get massive amounts of additional oil and gas in that 5-year period.
I would say more like 2 to 5%.
2 to 5% per year. Okay, all right.
Yeah,
so
not per year for the 5 years.
Right. Okay, and then wind, which you're really not a big fan of. Wind power, same kind of thing, maybe has more potential, but even there, the permitting, the ability to actually build it is not short-term, it's long-term. You have to, like the offshore stuff, especially, is really hard, but even the onshore stuff, the permitting and everything, much bigger deal. A 3 to 5 year deal, probably minimum, from the time you decide to do it, and maybe longer than 5 year offshore.
Right. And people don't know, the wind turbines, they are literally as tall as skyscrapers.
Right.
Like the blades are far bigger than like the ones from 20 years ago were the size of a spinning 747. Now it's like even twice as big. These things are just insanely huge.
Right.
And they're literally empty skyscrapers. But because like it's a cone of hollow metal and whatever. So but then you have to stick it onto a big cement and steel base, right? Floating someplace or something. So again, it's a massive construction project. If I was going to have something done by 2029, it's already in process. And then we're adding so much. And the rate that we're adding at, you can marginally increase it, but not much.
So, seems to me that we're down to solar panels.
Yes.
That's really the only way.
Right.
Now, doesn't Microsoft and Amazon and Tesla and Elon Musk and Jensen, I mean, these guys are all pretty bright, and Elon in particular is always way out there in terms of his 4D chess and his 4 moves out chess. Wouldn't all of these guys have been able to reach the same conclusion that you and I just did, that if you want to power these data centers in the next 5 years, the only way you're going to be able to do that is with solar?
Solar and batteries, right?
Yes,
That's your main, right? Solar and batteries, that's the main thing that you'd be using to do incremental new power, where Altimeter Capital with a $10 billion fund has projected that the US will go from 5% electricity, so 5% of all US power for data centers will go to about 20% by 2030.
Let me restate that because I'm not sure it was clear. So of all the electricity that we use,
in the United States,
5% of it goes to data centers, and it will increase to 20% by
2030.
By 2030. Okay.
Right. So, these guys are clearly in tune, have a very precise model. They have more information about who's building what than we do. So that's but the thing is, that was not a firm number.
Yeah.
They were saying roughly that. It could be more if we can pull it off.
Right.
Right. So, and then it'll also have data centers in Europe and in China and Asia, et cetera, like that. But when we say 5% of US electricity, that is 200 terawatt hours of the 4,000 terawatt hours, which is the equivalent of about 30 nuclear power plants.
Okay.
So, but we're not making 30 nuclear power plants. We've completed one in 20 years. China's making 30, but we are not. So China's adding 30 by 2030, but we are not. So, because Europe and the United States have not been adding power for a while. So we're going from not adding to adding.
So China, who also seems to like to think years out, they are making 80% of the solar panels in the world, something on that order.
That's right, 80%. Right.
And it's only become, I think, general knowledge, at least general knowledge to me in the last couple of weeks, that China has done it again. They have humongously overproduced. If that's not a good way to say it, but they have overproduced these solar panels almost like they did residential dwellings. And now they've killed the market. They've destroyed their own market. They're having to prop up the companies over there that are making them. Even as they have built massive solar farms themselves, far faster and far more capacity than any other country on the planet. Did I get all that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So now we have this massive oversupply of solar panels. We have a massive oversupply of batteries that we've been talking about that for a while. We have a problem with not enough transformers, which Elon just brought that up a while ago. I don't really understand. I think we're going to dig into that just a little bit in a minute, but I don't quite understand exactly. My dad that's all he did for 40 years was try to help the world go to underground transformers using epoxy encapsulated transformers instead of oil-based. And so, but as much as he was in that business, I don't really get it. So I want to talk about transformers in a minute, but that could also be a deal killer. So kind of like, okay, the big problem is electricity, but what was the old story about for a nail? I lost
Okay.
Yeah, or something, because I didn't have a nail to build the shoe, didn't have a shoe, so I didn't have a soldier that could go out. Anyway, something like that. I forget the poem now, but we have this transformer problem that could also be an issue. It would seem like building up the infrastructure or building up the capacity to build a lot of transformers fast might be possible. There's no permitting or other things like that necessarily that stand in the way of that. So we'll come back to transformers in a second. All right, so here's my proposition, Brian. Let's see if I'm just absolutely out of my mind. I think maybe if you build a massive solar farm next to your data center or your compute center, within a mile, 2 miles, 5 miles, whatever, you've got this massive data center and you build it really close to the compute. You need a bunch of transformers between those two in order to bring it down, transform it up or down in terms of voltage? Or is it kind of like the joke that you made in our last video where you just take the wire from the solar and put it in the wall?
Yeah, so you need a lot of transformers and a lot of electrical switches that are in the data center itself, distributing power within the data center. And then you need a lot of electrical equipment, transformers, switches, and stuff between the power plant and your data center. You can shorten it up so like the overall transmission lines are short because you want to put them side by side. Then you have to build like 50 miles of extra
Transmission lines.
transmission lines. But if I put it close, so I'm cutting that out, so I can simplify the problem, because I know what I want: this power, and this is this thing that's going to use it all up, and I can make them side by side, and then just add in this other equipment to do it, right? So, but it is quite a lot of equipment. You can roughly think of it like, I need to make a bunch of megapacks. Instead of megapacks, they're transformers, right? But then some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller, depending on what it is, and they're not just straight batteries. They're, like the oil container thing that you talked about. There's a lot of copper, a lot of steel in it that makes them, and there's some power switching electronics that go along with it, right? So, but roughly comparable to something like a megapack, but just different, right? Size, scale, yeah.
Now, in general, because I know that these data centers are already positioning themselves next to hydroelectric dams. I know they've already positioned themselves close to nuclear power plants in order to be able to use a significant portion of the power that was being generated by that dam or by that nuclear facility. So therefore, I would think, again, that the Amazons and the Teslas of the world would know that putting a big solar installation with batteries very, very close to where they want to build a data center or improve a data center or change it over to more AI type capacity where they're going to need more power, that this would all be knowledge that they already have and would not be that hard to come by.
Right. Because they've already been doing it for decades, right? For a couple of decades. We're basically like, Amazon has 30, 40, some number of dozens of regular data centers.
Right.
So they were already thinking about, how do I get the cheapest power for this thing? Because I'm using
it's a huge
5% of the US's power. Amazon's part might be 2% of US power. So they're using like 40, or 80 terawatt hours of power, right? So they were already thinking, what am I closest to, all that setting? So they have an entire department already working, on the utility agreements and all that stuff to get the power.
So here's my question, and it just baffles me. Okay, why in the world, if we know this and it's obvious and it's not hard to come by, is there an oversupply of batteries and solar? And why, if we have an oversupply of the very two things that are needed in order to get where we need to get by 2030, we have an oversupply of those two things. Why is the current administration putting tariffs on those very things when there's an oversupply and there's none being made in the United States to speak of?
Right.
And why aren't these companies buying up all of this excess solar and putting it in the ground as fast as they possibly can while it's cheap? I mean, it might get cheaper. That's always a possibility.
No, I agree that it won't necessarily get cheaper. Temporarily it might get cheaper. Technologically, it's driving towards cheaper, but the supply demand, like right now, it's cheap because demand is less than the supply. Right. There's a reason for that. China went and switched out all their gigafactories of solar to the newest level of solar because it was, more economical, more efficient, but then more production than the amount of whatever. But they were okay with that because the provincial governments and the Chinese national government said, we will eat some losses to keep our market share at 80%. Because if we just kept things normal and did things normally, maybe we go down to 60%, and then other guys get in the market.
Yeah.
Because it's geopolitical, they say screw that. Just like when you do oil, Saudi or Kuwait could say, I'm going to keep producing at $20 or $40 per barrel so they can choke out the other new production coming from blah.
Right.
Maybe from Texas or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So they do these power moves where, like, I'm going to eat losses for a year or two in order to
keep India out, to keep Mexico out, et cetera. Yeah, okay.
Right. So And that's what China's done. So this cheap thing is temporary, right? One, because we also have all this AI demand coming, right? We know it's going to start ramping up. So then, but China may say, I'm going to keep making new factories even ahead of this growing demand, because I'm going to eat losses for 5 years, 6 years, even with insane demand, because I'm going to have insane amount. I'm going to add 100 factories a year. I'm going to keep upgrading them, because at the end, I will own 80% of the new oil, the new power thing. I do that for batteries. I do that for solar. So then what did it cost me? It cost me, I don't know, $200 billion a year. And then at the end, if I own that market, then I'm the OPEC that has, instead of 30%, 40%, the way OPEC does, I got 80%, right? So then this tariff move is we're going to up the prices by 2 or 3 times, double, triple that, which only just gets you to even, actually. Because China's solar, they have 80% because they are 3 times cheaper.
3 times cheaper.
So they're so cheap and efficient that doubling or tripling your tariff only gets you even, or close to even, or maybe just a little bit ahead, right? So that is the power geopolitical game that China's playing. China's doing this game of chicken and saying, I'm ready to dump $1 trillion in this thing over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Are you willing to dump $1 trillion in that thing? If you're not, get on my way.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to roll right over you. Right. And then it's like, well, that's not economic. That's not capitalism. And it's like, so what? This is geopolitics.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So that is what the game is. So the my administration is correct. If you want to say we must get a decent chunk of this and have this domestic, otherwise our energy is dependent upon China, even though we're installing here, right? It's not quite the same, because like if I install it here, then it's still mine. I'm still producing power and batteries and stuff like that. But I need to upload this stuff to get the market share.
Okay, so is tariffs the best way to do that? Now we're getting outside of the realm of science and into the realm of politics, but is the tariff the best way to do that? I did applaud the Biden administration for the idea of their various incentives that they created over the last 3 years for chips and for infrastructure and for EVs and batteries, even though I thought it was way extreme too much of it. And Elon didn't even say he needed any of it, but some of this stuff made sense to me in terms of protecting American capability, strategic capability. It's kind of on the line of what you're talking about. So we do need to have theoretically a silicon capability here. We do need to have a lithium capability here. We need to have an ability to make batteries here. Otherwise, we actually put ourselves at a strategic disadvantage, even if it came to a hot war. So I can see all of that, but on the incentive side, I see it a lot better than I do on the tariff side. Not 100% sure that the tariffs are going to be the thing that encourage a bunch of companies to open up, start making them in the U.S.
So it's a EV policy to create and introduce, which changes the economic signal, right? So now it was 3 to 1, you were 3 times cheaper and whatever, now it's equal. So now it's like, okay, I should at least get some flowing back, right? So it's the policy, it's fast and easy to implement. It's pretty straightforward, and then it changes the business decision to do that. The issue is that of the top 7 solar companies, the only one that's not headquartered in China is, I think, Canadian Solar. And they have been shifting production to Southeast Asia. So it is the Vietnams, the Indias, or whatever that they're getting that. So if I do tariffs and I say, well, I can't get them into the United States because our costs are still too high, and we don't have the labor force to do it, because it will take you 6 months to a year to start training some number of people to do it.
Right.
And the question also be, will I be competitive when I do that? Because,
and even will I be able to have scale of any size in, but what would be probably 10 years before there's much scale.
Right. Because I'll need to have 100,000 people trained up to do it, and they'll need to be in location. So it's a question. It's not just a matter of are the panels the same cost?
Yeah.
Is my silicon production, my all the other materials, is that still there? Do I have the workforce to do it? I have to build the factories and stuff like that. If it's straight up, I need to make a gigafactory. We know that takes me a year to do a car gigafactory. How much? If I'm the same size of factory,
Right.
it will take a year or two just to. Even if I said, okay, I'm going to start 100 factories right now, break ground, and then they start making stuff. One, the factory, two, the supply chain, because that's one of the things slowing up Mexico for Giga Mexico was you had to get all the suppliers also to make their factories there to do stuff. So it's a long-term thing. And also the next administration, whether Biden or Trump, would also have to follow through. So you have to have consistency to say, we're going to do this multi-years. It's a 20-year game.
So,
right?
So for me, it comes down to that, whether it's tariffs, whether it's incentives, it comes down to that question of leadership again. And I'm not bragging on the current administration. I'm basically just saying nobody has stood up and said what we just said. Nobody has said, there's no way it's going to come from oil, nuclear. Nobody has said this. Even Elon hasn't said it. He's talked about transformers and he's talked about a big energy shortage, but he hasn't talked about the fact that the only way we're going to get there is with solar. Only way we can. It's not even legitimate to think about an alternative to this. It's solar, battery, and short transmission, not going over existing transmission lines because we don't have the capacity. Those transmission lines were put up 100 years ago, and they're the same kinds of wire that we used 100 years ago, and we haven't updated them.
There is some other solution for the inference side.
Okay.
That is a distributed inference, which means many small inference things, which is what Tesla and Elon talked about. That you would use the hardware 4, hardware 5, whatever, in your EVs, your Tesla cars, to do inference. So then I don't need to build. Well, you have solar charging your car, but I don't need extra for a inference data center cloud, right? And what is that? If I have 1 million cars, Tesla does have 1 million cars, and they have 60 kilowatt battery each, that's the equivalent of 60 gigawatts, which is the equivalent of 60 nuclear power plants.
Wow.
So we said 30, what we need to get there. So on the inference side, so you're training, which is one thing you make big data centers, and you have the inference, the cloud, where you're giving out the answers.
Right.
On the inference side, you can make the power completely from EVs or home solar charging your inference chips, whether they're in an EV or whether it's in a server in your home or whether it's in a Tesla bot in your home. So the inference part, which according to Chamath, the billionaire on the All In podcast, said that will be 100 times more than the training side. So you can
more than the training side. Wow.
100 times more than the training side. So you can get this without duplicative transmission lines beyond what you're doing to completely solarize your home. You still need to solarize your home to do that. Although you can get power from the other grid and something like that, but it's for the net 20%, you still need to get more power. But it helps with your infrastructure build out if you do it with distributed.
All right. Well, okay. So let us know in the comments below. Did we not figure something into this equation? Because to me, it all of a sudden became so obvious with the again headlines just this last week. I don't know if you saw them earlier, Brian.
I do want to add a couple of things before you wrap up on that. Is that the issue of whether China makes a solar or US makes a solar or that kind of thing, is that you cannot delay your race to AI or to EVs and like that, depending upon who's making the solar, right? That's important, but losing the game of AI and not building the data centers and not building the inference stuff
is a bigger deal.
That is a bigger deal, right? So I need to get as much of that as possible, and get the solar in. So if those tariffs end up saying, instead of building it in the United States, I'm gonna build it someplace else without the tariff,
Yeah.
which could be, well, it won't be in China per se, but someplace without I can import my China solar at 1/3 the cost. That could be $1 billion, right? Instead of $3 billion.
So
So
let me back up just a second. Are you saying that they maybe will build the data center in Canada or Mexico where there's no tariff?
right, or
And put the
Brazil,
solar there, put the solar in Canada, put the solar in, okay,
and then build there. So the tariffs, if the economic signal, so yes, the economic signal is build the new solar plant, which will take you 2 years
right,
in the United States. But instead, because I've increased my cost
right,
to build my energy, which I need to make net new, I need to make
right.
60 power plants worth of that by 2030. Then I can say, okay, well, I still need to get the cheapest China panels. I will send them to Brazil. I can't necessarily send them to Canada or Mexico because Canada and Mexico are part of the NAFTA agreement, and I'm screwed anyway, right? So the North American Free Trade Agreement. So
No,
then
no,
I
I know,
go,
but they wouldn't be affected by a tariff. So Mexico would, and Mexico, what a great place. Why aren't they putting up massive solar farms in Mexico? Like,
right,
isn't it, is it Australia that's
right,
actually building solar that they're gonna pipe the energy to Singapore?
right. Could
I think
be,
they're under the water in giant
yeah.
cables.
Right. I wouldn't do it in Canada because solar is
Yeah, not
weak
that
in
great.
Canada.
Yeah, yeah,
So I'm doing it in Mexico.
yeah,
So I'm going to one of these sunny countries,
yeah,
and then I'm going to get the cheapest solar cells from China,
yeah,
right? Because that's still the cheapest, right?
yeah.
I can't basically build it in China because of all the geopolitics around
No,
it.
no, no.
So I would build it someplace else where I could get the cheap panels. So by doing a blunt tariff thing, yes, it's encouraging this building thing, but it's ignoring the other part. So you have to have a more comprehensive thing that gets you the result you want
Right,
without screwing up the other part,
right.
right? So I don't think they necessarily got that right in their things. They're saying, okay, yes, we want solar, and then in 3 to 5 years we'll have more solar here. But if I chase out the AI data centers to Mexico, to
Mhm.
Brazil, to Honduras, wherever it ends up going, where I can get cheap panels, no tariffs, and cheap everything else, and more sun, then I could move them other places. So it's, as they say, is it the best tool? It could be the best tool for um, getting solar factories, gigafactories, 100 of them in the United States in 3 to 5 years. But it's a bit of a chicken the egg thing. You need
Yeah,
to make sure that that incentive hasn't messed up the other one,
right,
right? To
right,
make, because the AI data center is what matters.
right. Got it.
So,
All right. Yeah. So let us know again. Let me say again, in the comments, please, if we miss something, maybe there's something that we're not aware of, that you're aware of. I know I have one follower out there on my that listens to these YouTube videos who is an electrical guy who has a lot of experience in the large systems. Did we miss it somewhere? I'd love to hear from you. And because this is important, I think this combination of these last two shows might be, gosh, one of the most important things that the country's facing right now, and who is talking about it? And not anybody on either side of the aisle. And in this case, they are both messing the boat not to be talking about this, even though it's esoteric, it's all science. But the person who grabs it first, it was Kennedy. No fan of Kennedy, I'm sorry to tell you, but he was a great leader in that he grabbed a hold of a vision that nobody was going to grab a hold of. And he said, look, we're going to go to the moon by 1969. That's vision. That's leadership. That's what I'm looking for. Hey, Elon, you're the greatest visionary of the time. I think you need to tell this story. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but let me know in the comments below. Brian, thanks for helping to bring this to light. And maybe we're completely messed up. I don't think so.
okay, thank you.
It's been great talking to you all out there, and see you next time. Oh, by the way, whoops, I forgot to say, there'll be a card right here for the show that Brian and I just did the other day with regard to the AI side of this question, which was at least as important. Well, no, according to Brian, it was the most important one. So go back and check that one out.
Mhm.